Hi, this is Eric from longboxreview.com. Welcome to Center Seat, my Star Trek podcast. Before I fell in love with comic books, there was Star Trek. And while I have dabbled with Star Trek on the podcast, including one episode in the main Longbox review feed celebrating the 50th anniversary and a few others in the Gutters line, I've been wanting to do more episodes about my first fandom. So I will be rebroadcasting the episodes I've already released in this new Center Seat line, including today's episode, which is an introduction of sorts as to why I love Star Trek. Coming soon will be episodes about Star Trek Picard Season 1 and Discovery Season 2, among others. I hope you will join me on this strange new adventure. Thanks for listening.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
As you may have guessed, this episode will be a spotlight on my very first fandom. I'm talking about my love for Star Trek. So 2016 is the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, which debuted on September 8th, 1966. I was not even born at that time, but very shortly after that, about 8 years later, I fell in love with this wonderful concept, this show, the movies, the books, the comics, everything. And I'm going to talk a little bit about pretty much everything involved in the sphere of influence that Star Trek has had on my life. So like I said, debuted in 1966, but my first memory of Star Trek was, I believe this would be summer of 1974, I want to say. All I remember is I remember waking up from a nap in this particular house that my family lived in at the time. And I have a very vivid memory of this because this house was the house that I lived in when I went to kindergarten. And we had moved into the house, I believe, that very summer. It may have been spring. But anyway, all I remember about in relation to Star Trek, what I remember is that I woke up from a nap and I came in all sleepy-eyed, literally rubbing my eyes with my hands, coming out of my room. And in the living room, my parents were sitting there on the couch, and the little TV that we had, I want to say it was maybe a 13-inch TV, and on the screen, this brightly colored gentleman wearing a blue Starfleet uniform. And of course that is Mr. Spock. And I remember thinking, what the heck is this? And I was, I guess I was hooked because what I remember next in relation to Star Trek is, I would go visit my grandparents who lived in a place called Black Lake, which is located near Coeur d'Alene Lake in northern Idaho. And I would go spend summers or portions of summers with my grandparents. And I remember sitting on the floor of the house at my grandparents' house, and I would watch Star Trek in the afternoons. On top of that, like I said, they lived near Black Lake, and so it was a forested area for the most part. And there was a little spot down the road from the house that had a bunch of trees and other wildlife type, not wildlife, wild plants in the area. But I would pretend that was my little botanical garden on the Enterprise. So apparently, one of the episodes that I watched of the original series had a scene in which, or at least somebody talking about this garden spot in or on the Enterprise. And try as I might, I looked for that, trying to find a reference to it for one of the original episodes. and I couldn't find it. So I may have been confusing that with the animated series, perhaps. I don't know. It's been so long. I used to know all of the episodes, titles for the original series, which order they were, what they're all about. And I have to admit now, even though I love Star Trek, my memory's not what it used to be. And quite honestly, I don't watch Star Trek as religiously as I used to. I mean, I would, if, Star Trek was on, Star Trek, the original series was in syndication for many years, up to my late teens, early 20s. I remember it being on various channels, that I could watch. So pretty much, at least once a day during the week anyway, I could watch an episode of Star Trek. And I did, because like I said, it's one of my favorite concepts, one of my very favorite shows of all time. And, so I would watch it a lot over the years. And so it just kind of got ingrained in me. But of course, the last, I want to say 25, maybe 30 years, I haven't watched it as religiously, which is too bad because I still love it. I have been watching a few episodes here and there, especially after Leonard Nimoy died. I can't even remember when that was. It was earlier this year, but, cause I've been wanting to do a spotlight on Star Trek, the motion picture, instead of just doing this overall spotlight, like I said, ever since, Leonard Nimoy died, but, just never got around to it. Anyway, so I've been watching a few episodes of the original series just recently because, partly because of this talk that I plan to do, and also in relation to, certain events in Star Trek, the motion picture. So maybe I'll get to that one day. We'll see. Anyway, so like I said, I would watch it all the time. I was hooked. Star Trek was just something I loved. The bright colors of the costumes, the flamboyant characters. I'm thinking specifically of Captain Kirk, the unflappable Mr. Spock, the very emotional Dr. McCoy, and all the other characters that everybody has grown to love over the decades. I became a Trekkie, and I was not embarrassed to say that I was a Trekkie. I know there was a time in the late 70s, early 80s, I think it was, where Trekker became the word for people who were serious about Star Trek, but we're not children. So, we gotta use a term that makes us sound, a little more, I guess a little less like a kid, right? So they chose Trekker as opposed to Trekkie. And I'm like, you know what? Embrace your fandom. So I totally reject the concept of Trekker. I find it quite honestly a bit pretentious. But to each their own. If you're a Trekker, great. I just prefer the term Trekkie. It's not like you're a fooder, you're a foodie. Anyway, like I said, I became a Trekkie. And, like I said, I love the characters. It's science fiction. I've always been partial to science fiction. Early on for me, it was about, future tech and aliens. Later I kind of discovered the whole, not discovered. I appreciated and was drawn to the utopian future quality of what was Star Trek and what was the Federation. Gene Roddenberry's vision. And about that same time, as I start to understand those concepts of utopian future and allegory, I appreciated that. The social commentary that science fiction would often employ. So I fell in love with all that stuff. And then, the ships, the tech. Man, I love Star Trek ships like no other science fiction franchise ever. And that really started with not the original series Enterprise, but the refit Enterprise from Star Trek: The Motion Picture. There was something about this, really slight modifications to the original design that just somehow spoke to me. And then we've had, various ships over the years introduced mostly through Star Trek: The Next Generation and all of the other that era of Star Trek television programs. But I'll talk about those a little bit more later. So, like I said, 1974-ish, I was introduced to Star Trek. I watched Star Trek in syndication in the 70s on through. But, after Star Trek was canceled in 1969, after 3 seasons, there was no new Star Trek. Well, that's not true. There was no new live action Star Trek until Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out. So in between that time is kind of like what I think of as the dark days between the cancellation and like I said, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So during that time, I sought out and purchased as much as I could for the things that were available. And specifically, I'm thinking of the books, the novels, the short novels that came out from Bantam Books. So there was, I don't know if you're aware of this, there was a series of 12 books put out by Bantam Books, simply titled Star Trek 1 through 12. These are adaptations written by James Blish, and in some cases with J.A. Lawrence. I think maybe that's only the final one. But anyway, these are short stories told in prose form of the episodes of the original series. And so I would buy those as I found them. Eventually got all 12. I still have them to this day. In fact, in my office as I'm recording this, I am surrounded by all of this stuff, mostly books, actually, and some other things too, ships and whatnot. But I am surrounded by my Star Trek collection. And so I read as many of those James Blish books. There were other Bantam books. Let's see here. Such as Spock Must Die. That was also written by James Blish. Spock Messiah, Planet of Judgment, Trek to Mad World, The Starless World, and Perry's Planet. Those are a bunch of the books that were published around either right before or right after Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Let's see. Spock Must Die was published in 1970 was the original date, but I must have gotten this in around 1978, 79. And the motion picture came out in 79, I believe. So, there are a bunch of books, and I read as much as I could. I eventually found a copy of The Making of Star Trek by Stephen Whitfield, which introduced me to the whole concept of producing television programs and writing for television programs and all that entails. And that really instilled a love of looking at the behind the scenes things, not just for Star Trek, but for other properties that I love. And so that was kind of like the Bible of what it was to produce a television program, at least from my viewpoint. And I read the Making of Star Trek at least a couple times over the years. I still have it. It's kind of beat up now, but let's see what else. There was a couple of these, maybe 3, but at least 2 that I'm aware of. It was a series of fan written stories published in the Star Trek: The New Voyages collections, and I have one here. This is edited by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Colbreth, who actually wrote at least a few Star Trek novels. Once Pocket Books, was it Pocket Books? Yeah, Pocket Science Fiction. Once they started producing novels after Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Anyway, they edited this, and there is a particular book or a particular story. I mean, there's a lot of good stories in this the New Voyages collection, but one in particular is called The Mind Sifter, and this was written by, let's see here, I want to make sure Shirley Mayuski, I want to say. Anyway, that was a really, really cool story. And I always thought that they should make either a movie or an episode if they ever did do a new series, a new live action series of Star Trek. Let's see here. So during that time, there was also Star Trek. Oh, wait, before I do that. And one other thing, at some point, my mother bought my brother and I just kind of glommed onto his copy, although I don't have it anymore. But there was, everyone's aware, I'm sure, of the Gold Key Star Trek comics that were published. When was that? That was 60 something. Hold on one second. Let me check my notes here. Yeah, starting in 1967, they started publishing these comics based on the Star Trek concept. And in, I want to say, 1978, Whitman, who was also basically Gold Key, put out a couple of these collections of there were two issues of the Gold Key comics they put together and repackaged, and they called them Dynabrite comics. And we got a couple of those. My mom got these for us. And so, that was my first exposure to Star Trek comics. Anyway, so during this time, like I said, Star Trek, the animated series, so that came out in 1973 through 1974, I believe. So around the same time that I discovered Star Trek, but I did not discover the animated series until I think a few years later, when it was still running on Saturday morning during the cartoon block. And so I watched as many of those as I could. I don't think I watched every one of them until they came out like on DVD. I'm not sure of that. I want to say that I watched them all before, but I really couldn't say. In fact, since I'm thinking of it, there were up to the point of Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, I almost had not seen Space Seed, which was the precursor to The Wrath of Khan. But like shortly before that movie came out, I was able to watch it. I think one of the channels that Star Trek was syndicated on was trying to take advantage of the excitement for that movie coming out, and so they would play Space Seed. So I was able to watch it before Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Anyway, so I watched as much of the animated series as I possibly could. And then there was also the Star Trek Power Records. So that, I guess that was probably my second exposure to basically what you could consider a Star Trek comic, because if you're not familiar with the Power Records, they were basically comics that you would listen to the audio, the dialogue and the sound effects as you read the story unfolding in front of you in comic book form. And so I still have one of those. I don't remember when it came out, but it had a couple stories in that as well, and I love it. I don't actually have a record player anymore, so I can't listen to it. But every once in a while I'll pull it out just to read the story. Okay, so that was like I said, the dark days between basically the mid 70s through the time of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So 1979. So I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I remember when Star Trek: The Motion Picture came to my little town. It wasn't the only. It was our big theater, which had 3 screens at that time. And I begged my parents to let me go. I can't remember if I had to take my little brother or I wanted to. But anyway, we ended up getting dropped off. One of my parents dropped us off at the movie theater, and I'm dismayed because I see this horrendously long line coming from the ticket booth. And I'm standing there and And I don't have a watch, but I know, because based on the time that one of my parents dropped me off, that it's really close to the start time of the movie. And I'm freaking out because I'm missing it. I'm going to miss it. And my brother keeps trying to calm me down. I'm yelling at him to shut up because he doesn't understand the importance of what's going on here. And then eventually I honestly do not remember how long it was before all of a sudden most of the line walked away. And it was because this other movie that was out at the same time, and I can't remember what it was. I looked it up at one point a couple of years ago, just out of curiosity, but I don't recall what it is now. But there was a movie out at the same time that everybody was just gaga about, apparently, and they had sold out of the tickets for that showing, and just everybody walked away. And I grabbed my brother's hand and I ran up to that ticket booth, bought the tickets. He wanted to either go to the bathroom or get some popcorn. I don't know which one it was. I did not care. I drug him into that theater. We found 2 seats, and I missed like the first 10 or 15 minutes of that movie. You can imagine how disappointed I was. And it wasn't until the movie came out I probably saw it when it debuted on ABC sometime after that. And that's where you get the ABC, what I refer to as the ABC cut, which was an extended version. It included scenes that were not in the theatrical release. And so yeah, I didn't get to, that must have been at least a year, maybe 2. I should look this up. I don't remember how long it was, but I mean, for like I said, for a Star Trek fan as I was, to not see those first 10 minutes, because there's a lot of story set up there in those first 10 minutes of that movie. I want to say that the first scene that I remember was seeing Kirk and McCoy either in his office or it was the transporter scene where McCoy first arrives. I don't think it was, because I don't remember him being bearded in the scene. So anyway, this is a long time ago. So there's Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and I to this day I love that film more than I probably should, because it's generally considered one of the worst Star Trek films. But I have a certain love for it, and I love to pull out my DVD and watch it every once in a while. So like I said, about that same time, Pocketbook started publishing Star Trek novels, and I read as many of those as I could. In fact, I still have many of them from that time period. There's one in particular. I should say I read as many as I could, bought as many as I could. And just a few years ago, I went through my copious amounts of Star Trek novels and got rid of a lot of them. Ones that didn't, they're okay, but they weren't really cool stories. So I got rid of them, but I still have about a dozen. There's one in particular that I want to mention. Yeah, this came out in 1981. This is called The Entropy Effect by Vonda McIntyre, which is one of my very favorite Star Trek novels. It focuses a lot on Spock trying to save Kirk, who was killed by this insane criminal. There's time travel aspects to it, and it focuses a lot on Sulu, and in particular this security officer, this lieutenant commander security officer whose name escapes me at the moment, which I think is kind of apropos, because when Star Trek Discovery was announced, and in particular the main character who is the first officer of the Discovery, I want to say that first officer is also a lieutenant commander. So I thought that was an interesting parallel between this beloved Star Trek novel of mine and the latest version of Star Trek television, which is Discovery, and I'll talk about that later too. Then came, about that time it came. So Pocketbooks would put out the novelizations of the movies, and I read starting with The Wrath of Khan, I actually read the novelization before I saw the movie. spoilers, right? And so I remember reading this book, and I specifically remember reading this. I was in my bedroom, in my bed. It was bedtime, but I was reading it, and I got to the point where the scene where Spock dies is in it, and I'm almost ashamed to admit, no, I'm not really. I cried as I read that scene. And then, of course, you see that scene, and that scene still to this day gets me every time. There were also these photo stories. I'm pretty sure I got the motion picture one first, and so again, these are put out by Pocket Books, and these are stills. I don't know if you're familiar with what photo novels or photo stories. They take stills from the movie and then put them together in kind of a comic book form and add dialogue boxes. So you get the story. They had to condense some things down, but you basically get the movie in this photographic form. And the Star Trek, the motion picture photo story, was done in color. So you get all these nice little color pictures from the movie. And then Star Trek II, the Wrath of Khan photo story came out, and I was really excited, and I get it, and it's all black and white. And they're not dialogue boxes that are added. It's captions added next to or under the photos, the stills from the movie. So it's kind of a letdown, but anyway. I know there were also, speaking of these photo novels or photo stories, I know that they also, somebody did. I don't know if it was Pocket Books. It might have been somebody else. But there are a collection of the original series photo stories, which I have never seen. I've only heard of them. I always keep an eye out for them, but I'm sure they're pretty expensive. So anyway. I think around that same time, this is when the Starfleet Technical Manual came out, and this was a book that had been out before, but it was re-released, I think, around the same time as one of the movies, and so I got that, and of course, has all the great Star Trek techie goodness in it, talking about the ships and phasers and the uniforms. So it's like that stuff I just ate up. On top of that, I discovered one of the greatest games ever. And I'm speaking of Starfleet Battles, where you, on a map, a hex map, you had these little counters, these little square counters, and on the counter is the top view of the ships. And you had these little, they're called SSD sheets. And you would fill out this energy allocation sheet, and you would power up your shields, your weapons, your warp engines, and you would fly around on this map and battle each other. So it was kind of like Risk in a way, sort of. But, it basically it was a tabletop Star Trek game. And I discovered that, and I roped my friends into playing it as much as I possibly could. I still have the original games that I got back in 1979, 1980-ish, and have added to my collection since then, because there's been a lot of product put out over the years from, who puts that out? Oh, I'm blanking on it now. I'm going to look that up. Oh, yeah, it was the Amarillo Design Bureau. I believe it's now called something else, but that's who, it came out in 1979. Anyway, I love that game. There was a new edition that just came out a few years ago that was designed because the rules for Starfleet Battles was, enormous. There was, the rule books were just chock full of, you have to do this to do that, and this is how you do this thing, anyway, people would not play with me because there were so many rules, and I wasn't a walking encyclopedia of the rules. So we'd have to stop. We have to look up the rule, determine if you could or could not do it in this way, and so it slowed the game down. Anyway, the company that produced Starfleet Battles came out a few years ago, like I said, with a faster play version that I ended up getting as a gift. My wife got it for me. I've yet to play it. She must have gotten it for me at least 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago for Christmas or my birthday. And I still haven't played it, and which is a real bummer. So I need to rectify that because I gotta love that game. Let's see here. So I think around this time, this is shortly after Star Trek 2. No, it was between Star Trek The Motion Picture and Star Trek 2. This is where I became aware of the comics that were coming out. So Marvel Comics got the license after Star Trek The Motion Picture, and I only got one issue of that comic, and I'll talk about that in more detail later. Then DC got the license after Star Trek 2, and continued on through after Star Trek 5, and then of course now IDW had. I think Marvel got it again. Malibu got at least DS9, and then IDW more recently is doing really fine Star Trek comics. But like I said, I'll talk about those later. 1987, this is when I went to my first Star Trek convention. So a buddy of mine, Norman, he and I had a love of Star Trek, and he told me about the Star Trek convention that was coming to Spokane, Washington in May of 1987. And so we decided that we would go. Which is the first time I'd ever done anything like that. We had to get, basically we went to our teacher, our homeroom teacher, and asked if we could leave school early so that we could go to this convention. And she was really cool about it. I think she wasn't as big a fan, but I think she was into Star Trek at least a little bit. Anyway, so we went to Star Trek. We drove what is it, about 100 miles? No, it's more like, about 110 miles. We would drive there. This is over the course of a long weekend, so Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We would drive from our hometown, drive to Spokane, go to the convention all day, and then drive back home. And we get home between 11 and midnight, depending. And we did that for 3 days. It was awesome. I met, I met Majel Barrett there. So this was right before Star Trek 4 was coming to theaters. And they showed a quick scene from Star Trek 4 that got cut from the final version, they told us. And it happened to be a scene involving Nurse Chapel, Majel Barrett. And so I was in line looking at stuff, and she was there talking to fans, and and I talked to her and let her know that I thought it was unfortunate that they cut that scene because I thought that was really cool, and she thanked me. At that same time, that's when I bought a uniform, the original series command uniform tunic pattern. And I held onto that thing for a few years, and then eventually my wife, who knew how to sew a little bit, made the command gold uniform for me. So I thought that was really cool. I still have it. I can't fit into it anymore. The velour shrinks, right? It has nothing to do with my girth, of course. Anyway, so back to the con, though. I also, DeForest Kelley walked by me. We were in the big convention hall for the place that it was in, and D. Kelley had just arrived. I don't remember exactly what was going on, but all of a sudden he just, they announced him. He appeared on the stage. He said a few words, And then he walked off the stage and then walked down the row, the open, the walkway, through the room, through all of us fans. And, it kind of surprises me now that we didn't, some people didn't mob him as he walked. And I happened to be sitting on the aisle seat, and he walked right. He was inches from me, which at that time it was like being in the presence of God in a certain way. And but it struck me. I remember thinking, wow, he looks old. He looked frail. And you see him up on screen in Star Trek 4, and he didn't look like that. So, it just really surprised me then. I also walked by, or Mark Leonard walked by us. Norman and I were walking down the hallway in one part of the hotel in which the convention was. And, here's Mark Leonard in a bathrobe and a swimming cap, because he was going to the pool that was there. And, he was walking by, and he kind of looked at us and nodded slightly, but, it was very much yes, I see you're there, and I can see that you're freaking out with these big ass grins on your faces, because you recognize me, but do not come near me. But it doesn't matter, because both Norman and I were thrilled that we got to see Sarek up close and in person. And finally, I did see, who was it? George Takei from a distance, because I remember that one of the things that you could do as a convention goer, as a fan attending, was that you could sign up. I don't think you had to pay for this then. I think you just had to sign up, and you could go jogging with George Takei. And I remember Norman and I were walking into the hotel as we saw this large group of people jogging away from us, and there was George Takei there at the front of the group. So they don't do things like that anymore. Of course, everybody's much older now, but I just thought that was really cool that they were so willing to. Some of the folks were so willing to interact with the fans in that way. And of course, that convention was before, was it Creation Entertainment or whoever it is that is in charge of the Star Trek conventions now, where, it's a huge money making thing. It's very, I kind of think of it as much more structured than the early conventions that I went to. Let's see. So, 1987 is also the start of Star Trek: The Next Generation. And, I was not able to watch basically the first 2 seasons of that show. I do remember when we were at the convention that there was talk of Star Trek: The Next Generation. There wasn't a whole lot that I remember knowing about it, but I remember the hardcore fans, thinking, or, making comments about, well, they can't do this and all this stuff. Star Trek is Kirk and Spock and McCoy and all that stuff. No one knew at that time what a juggernaut the Next Generation would become and what kind of impact it had itself on, Star Trek in general. So, but anyway, I could not watch The Next Generation because at that time, the cable company that we had did not have that channel. We could watch it over the air, but the quality was so bad that it was unwatchable. There were, depending on your, I guess, your antenna, for those that don't know, you used to have an antenna on your house to be able to watch television. This is before cable became a thing. And you're thinking cable there was a time before cable, and I lived through it. But I remember going to my wife's family's house. This is before we were married, though, and I was a guest there, and I asked if it were possible to watch Star Trek. The Next Generation. And they were not, they were not Star Trek fans, let's put it that way. But they were polite and allowed me to do so. I believe the first episode that I ever watched of Star Trek The Next Generation was the introduction of the Ferengi in the first season, which is not a good way to start that show. Anyway, but starting with, I believe it was either starting somewhere in season 2 or probably season 3 when the cable company finally was able to broadcast that particular station in which carried The Next Generation. And then, of course, I watched every episode every week. And then, of course, came Deep Space Nine, which still to this day, so far, I think had the best pilot of any Star Trek series. And is my favorite Star Trek series after the original series. Because, I'll talk about that later too. Then, of course, Voyager and on to Enterprise. In the meantime, other things that came along that were Star Trek related that affected me greatly. I mentioned Starfleet Battles, the tabletop space combat game. Well, eventually, there was a video game version of this called Starfleet Command. This is in 1999. And oh my God, I played the heck out of that and the 2 sequels to the game that came out. But none were as good as that original one. Well, maybe the second one, Starfleet Command 2. That probably was better overall. But by the time they got to start the third version of the game, they tried to really dumb it down, and I didn't like it. I mean, it made it easier to play, but in some respects. But I don't know. It took away from the Starfleet Battles-esque quality to it. So I didn't like it as well. But the game even had, or at least my daughter, who has never been a Star Trek fan, she even played it for a while. She even enjoyed trying to blow up ships with the Enterprise or some other Federation starship. Around that time, there was another convention, this time focusing on the Next Generation cast, in which I believe Michael Dorn was there. Yes, because my wife was really excited because she really likes Worf. And so we went up to Spokane for a weekend and went to that convention. And I got to talk to Marina Sirtis. I think this was about the time. No, I remember there was something going on. Oh, it was coming up on the end of the run of the show. So this was about 93, 94. So we knew the end was coming. Pretty sure it had to have been the summer before the end of the show. So yeah, it would have been like the summer of 93. So we knew that the final season was coming up. And I remember her talking about how they wanted, or at least she wanted, more seasons out of it. And I remember having a discussion with her about that. So I'm going to start mentioning my wife a lot because while she's not a huge Star Trek fan, or a Star Trek fan for that matter, she knows how much I am. And so she has done a lot over the years to make me happy in that regards. One of the things that she did was she surprised me with a trip to Las Vegas when the Star Trek Experience opened up. So we got to go within that first 6 months, I think it was, maybe the first year, within the first year for sure, of the opening of Star Trek The Experience, which, talk about immersing yourself in Star Trek. When The Experience was there at, what was it, the Las Vegas Hilton, I think it was. And it was, I couldn't even, I don't think I could adequately put this into words, how I felt there. It was almost a religious experience for me. It was wonderful. But not only did I get to go there, but we went back and I was able to take my daughter with me. It was just a vacation to go to Vegas, and so I got to experience that with my daughter. So that was really cool. Let's see. Also around the same time, I discovered that there were the fan web series, the Star Trek: The New Voyages, which then I think became Star Trek Phase 2, The New Voyages. That was interesting to see. Actually, a well done fan made television show, I guess is the best way to put it. The actors were doing their darndest to portray, the characters of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and the rest. Over time, of course, some other actors have taken on the roles. I think they've had at least 3 Captain Kirks, maybe just as many Spocks, but it's still going on to this day. You can look it up if you go look for Star Trek Phase 2, The New Voyages, or Star Trek New Voyages, or whatever it is. Not to be confused with Star Trek: The New Voyages, the book series that I mentioned earlier. And of course, heyday of the Next Generation, they came out with all of these reference books, the companions or compendiums, the Star Trek, the encyclopedia, which they just came out this year, 2016, which I'm hoping Santa brings me. If I've been a good boy. The latest version of it, for the 50th anniversary, they came out with a 2-volume set of the encyclopedia that I want really bad. The chronology, which I love the chronology. That stuff just trying to fit in, the time period and stuff. When Star Trek Enterprise was going on, that next season, if they would have gotten a 5th season, if I remember correctly, that time period, that should have been the time of the Romulan War. And so I was really curious how they were going to do that, or if they were going to do it, or if they were going to jump over it or whatever. But the chronology is one of those things I love. The tech manuals, they have the Star Trek: The Next Generation tech manual. There's a Deep Space Nine tech manual. I love that crap. I really do. There's the ships of the line. There's this set of calendars, and then they took the pictures from the calendars and put them into a couple versions of the book called Ships of the Line. And it's just this wonderful digital art showing various ships, mostly Federation starships, but others as well, set in the Star Trek timeline. So those are wonderful. I pull those out every once in a while. As I said, I love the ships, and so there's a book tailor made for me. Then, after Enterprise, we had a little bit of time where there was no more Star Trek. And then we get the reboots, the reboot movies. And then, of course, Discovery, Star Trek Discovery, which was supposed to debut in January 2017, but has been pushed out to May 2017. And that will start the next 50 years of Star Trek. Speaking of Discovery, let me just talk about that. Okay. I'm really, really excited to see Star Trek Discovery. It's more Trek. It's more Trek on television. I think Star Trek works better on the small screen with multiple episodes so that you can focus on the characters and the development of that universe, that time period or whatever. And I'm also really liking the idea of the focus on the first officer in the series instead of the captain. We have had way too many shows focused on the captain and his tight band of crew that he often, or she often, interacts with. So I always felt like, so there was, speaking of that, there was a Next Generation episode called Lower Decks, which was a whole episode focused on some junior officers on the Enterprise. And I always felt that they had a missed opportunity there, because this was at the time that that episode aired, I think Voyager was coming, and we didn't know a whole lot about it. And so I was really hoping that Voyager would be focused on the junior officers on a Federation starship instead of the captain and first officer and whatnot. Of course, they didn't do that with Voyager, but so I'm kind of hoping that we'll have a little bit of that, at least in Discovery. However, this could turn into another like West Wing type situation where, if you're not familiar with the West Wing, or this aspect of the West Wing, the show was supposed to focus on the people who helped the president, the chief of staff and the people who worked for the chief of staff, but the audience response and the response of the creators of the show for Martin Sheen's portrayal of the President Bartlett, became overpowering. And so they focused a lot on the president instead of on the other characters. So I'm kind of concerned that might happen with Star Trek Discovery, where we start off focused on the first officer, but it quickly becomes the first officer and the captain. So, we shall see. We don't know a whole lot yet as of this recording about that, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not too sure about the time period, which I believe is like 10-ish years before Kirk's time. So, mostly because, Star Trek Enterprise, well, I enjoyed it quite a bit. It was not a fan favorite. And I always question the idea of going back to the earlier time frame within Star Trek, because the original series looks so retro, so old fashioned in comparison to like Enterprise, which was set before the original series, and yet it has to aesthetically look more futuristic than the original series did, even though it was a time period before then. But maybe having Discovery set just a few years before Kirk's time, that way you have that familiar. You're tapping into that nostalgia aspect of the original series, but you also get to take advantage of the kind of like, not the early days of the Federation, but how Kirk was often out in the outer reaches of the Federation, and basically he could do pretty much whatever he wanted to. He had discretionary powers that I don't think Captain Picard had in the 24th century. So there's a lot of story potential there, but I'm still hesitant. Like I said, we don't know. We don't know what it's going to be like, but these are just the thoughts that are coming to me as I contemplate what Discovery might mean. Let's see. I'm also glad that they're setting Discovery in the Star Trek, the Prime universe, not the Kelvin universe. Not that I have anything at all. I don't have a beef with the Kelvin universe. I really, really liked the reboot movies. But I like the idea of Star Trek TV being set in Prime, and they could do more movies, if the studio and the cast can work out to do another movie, a fourth movie in that timeline. They can even branch out, and they could make this a franchise. They could do what Disney's doing with Star Wars. They really could. I don't think they will, but they definitely could do that. And they could just leave the movies in the Kelvin timeline and have the two areas separate, which I think that's a good idea. I do not care, however, for the look. I don't care for the look of the ship. And I don't think they've officially talked about this for some weird licensing thing, I guess, but they've based the look of the Discovery on concept art for what the Enterprise could have looked like for what was it Phase 2, Star Trek Phase 2, the aborted second television series that they were going to do. I might be confusing that with something else related to that time period before Star Trek the Motion Picture. Anyway, just that the idea of a flat secondary hull just looks plain and not interesting at all. But we'll see. So I love the ships, but I'm not loving this one. I'm also not all that keen on the delivery of the show, which is while CBS has talked about debuting the pilot on network television, they are going to move the rest of the broadcast of the show onto the CBS streaming service. You know, you spend $6 or $7 a month to access that. Yeah, I don't know. I can understand why they want to do that, but and there's been a lot of talk recently as I record this about how they could do more adult stories because anything that's on the streaming service isn't subject to the standards and practices of broadcast television, which makes me kind of leery. You know, are they going to do Game of Thrones in Star Trek? I certainly hope not. But again, we shall see. But still, it's more Star Trek. So I am very optimistic. I'm very much looking forward to it. I can't wait to see what it's going to be. I just have to decide if I'm going to pay that monthly fee to access Star Trek week to week, or if I'm going to wait until the the dozen or so episodes I think they talked about doing until those have aired, and then binge watch it. I probably won't do that because I can't wait. I'm too much of a Trekkie to do that. And what did I think of Star Trek Discovery Season 1? Well, dear listener, you'll just have to listen to a future episode of Center Seat. In the meantime, thanks for listening.